How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Perfect Reload Weekly, where we take a look back at the week in video game news. My name is Steve. It's nice to be home again, back at the moon base. Christian, how you doing this week?
We're finally back at your precious Perfect Reload Laboratory moon base. Now you can stop complaining.
Yes, it is good to be here, but I do ask, since we are allowed back into U.S. territory, how did you resolve all your legal issues?
Well, much like when 50 Cent remembered he had Bitcoin, I remember that in the 90s I hired a lookalike whose body could be used to get me out of certain sticky situations. We're just gonna leave it at that.
Awesome. Did you have like your own personal blood bag like in Mad Max? Honestly, I don't want to know. Well, I guess we'll get started with what I've been playing this week. This week, big new release. One of the bigger ones of the year, most likely. Star Wars Jedi Survivor came out. The new Respawn game sequel to Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Christian, I know that you're a big Star Wars fan. How you finding this so far?
I found some diagrams online for making your own lightsaber. You told me I need to find a hobby, so if this goes bad for either one of us, it's on you.
You should not be allowed to have arms or hands. Or weapons, for that matter. So before I get into my thoughts on the new game, Jedi Survivor, I want to talk a little bit about the first game, Fallen Order. So when it was initially announced, my interest was obviously piqued because I'm a big Star Wars fan. Star Wars has been a pretty big part of my life. I remember watching them as a child because my grandmother, oddly enough, was a really big Star Wars fan. I'm not quite sure what clicked with her, but she really liked Star Wars. So she had VHS copies of, she had taped it off TV. My grandparents had a very large VHS collection, but they weren't like commercially released VHS. They used to just tape movies off TV, and they were just in a giant pile on the floor, like really organized, all like laying sideways, not up like a bookshelf, but laying sideways on the floor, so you could read the label of the movie, and you could just span across and see them. So I watched a lot of time when I was there, we put on Star Wars. And before they released episode 1, the first of the prequels in theaters, they re-released all of the originals in theaters. And my parents actually took me to see all of them. So I've actually seen every Star Wars movie in a theater, which is kind of cool. And so, yeah, Star Wars is a really big part of my life. I, watch the prequels, they've grown on me a little bit as I've gotten older. I really liked episode 1 at the time. Did not like episode 2. I really liked episode 3. I actually really like the newer ones. I know a lot of people get down on them. They have some problems. There are certainly some problems with those movies. I think my biggest issue is they just tried to cram too much into them. Maybe they shouldn't have been a trilogy. Maybe there should have been 4. I don't know. Or maybe just shorten your story a little. I digress. But it's safe to say that I'm a really big Star Wars fan. So I've oddly, though, not played a lot of Star Wars video games. I've, played some. I played the Super Nintendo ones, Shadows of the Empire on N64, Masters of Terras Kasai. That was when I bought my PS1. My mom took me to Electronics Boutique in 1997 to buy a PlayStation 1. She said, you can get one game, and I chose Masters of Terras Kasai. So that was the only game I had to play until like Christmas that year, to enjoy on my PS1. But, I played like Pod Racer and stuff like that, but I didn't play like the GameCube ones that people really like. Like I never got into like Republic Commando and stuff like that. I did like the Battlefront games. I really liked those. I thought they were great. The PS2, PS2 games. But when Fallen Order was announced, and the kind of word going around was it was going to be very influenced by the Souls games, Demon Souls, Dark Souls, all that. Hard combat, punishing combat, you need to parry, block, timing based, like all that kind of stuff. Stamina system, you can't just save, you have to find these save points, in the games are meditation points. I guess it's the equivalent to bonfire, and I don't like those games. They're not for me. So I decided not to play the game, and it got really good reviews. Everybody was talking about it, and there were a couple people that were like, I get that you don't like the Souls games, but they're not that much like them. They're just kind of similar-ish. They're not as brutal. It's something you might really like. You really like Star Wars, maybe you should try it out. But still, I put it off, and I just didn't play it because I was like, well, I don't like that style of game. Even the Star Wars branding is not going to get me to enjoy this. So I just didn't play it. And then I ended up in 2020, at the tail end of 2020, I ended up in a hotel room for 2 weeks and taking care of some personal stuff. But I had brought my Xbox with me for the trip, and I don't know what it was that led me to do this, but I decided to download Fallen Order before that trip, and I played it. I ended up played it start to finish over the course of 2 weeks. I played it with a walkthrough with a guide because I just didn't want to get lost. I knew how tricky some of the navigation was going to be from hearing some comments about the way the map system worked and all this stuff, and a lot of backtracking and all that. So I played it with a guide, and I ended up really enjoying the game. I wouldn't say it was my favorite or anything like that, but I did really enjoy the game. And then when this game was announced, Survivor was announced, I was like, well, I really like that first game, but I just don't know about this one. How about I just wait for reviews and see how it plays out, and then maybe I'll pick it up. We'll see what happens. And I still kind of had that thought process up until maybe about a month ago, 2 months ago, whatever it was, until they started doing those hands-on previews, and people in the media and the press got to play the game and talk about the game and show footage of the game. And then it started coming out as like, oh, a lot of like the little nuanced things that people didn't really like about the first game, they have fixed, they have corrected. There's fast travel in the game, maybe a little bit less backtracking. Combat system is a little bit more refined, and it kind of started to turn the wheels in my head, and I was like, maybe I should pick this up. So finally I was like, all right, well, I'll get it, put my pre-order down. And so on Friday night, I went over to the local GameStop after work and picked up my copy. Went on about my day and, wrapped up some errands and stuff like that. Got home, played with the dog, ate dinner, all that stuff, watching some TV. It was probably about 9 o'clock at night, and I needed to get up real early on Saturday, yesterday for me, 2 days ago for you guys. And I was like, well, I can't stay up too late tonight, but I do want to crack into the game so I can, have some time to talk. I want to be able to talk about it on the show. So I start playing the game, and I could not put it down. It's fantastic. It's really good. I think the opening section, the Coruscant section, which is about an hour and a half, so, opening segment, it's got some tutorialization in there. I think it's a really strong start to the game. It really shows off the variety of combat. It gets you used somewhat to the map. It's not as open and full of nooks and crannies and offshoots as when you get out into the open world, the next planet you get to. But it gets you used to it, and it really does with the combat. There's a boss battle and a semi or a mid boss battle and all this stuff. So you really do kind of get thrown into it and used to it, and it's really, really nice. It's a great introduction, especially I would say if you maybe didn't play the first game. It does open up with a full recap of the first game, although it is done in kind of an abstract way. I still think you would probably need to read a recap or watch a summarization video or something like that to get the full depth of the first game. But once that opening part is done and you get to the next planet, that's when it really, really kind of takes shape of some of the changes they made to the game. I think one of the biggest things for me, and this was a bit of a complaint I had with with Hogwarts Legacy this year was Hogwarts Legacy had a lot of quests where you would enter like a tomb or a dungeon or whatever, and it's linear, right? Like there's puzzles along the way and there's combat along the way, but eventually you're going to get from point A to point B, complete the quest objective, and then it's like, okay, to actually complete the quest, go talk to the quest giver. Well, now you got to backtrack all the way through this dungeon, and because you've killed all the enemies, there's nothing going on. Like you don't even have the opportunity to fight other enemies to get XP or something like that. Now you're just backtracking. And that would have been one of those things where if the quest just ended and then it just teleported you back outside, like that does happen a few times in that game. There are some missions that do that. But with Jedi Survivor, obviously with the meditation points, which is how you both save the game, you unlock your skill points through the skill tree, all that stuff, but also you can rest, and that will refill your health, but also respawn all the enemies. So in that instance, you get to the end of like a dungeon, a tomb, whatever, you could theoretically work your way backwards to the front, fight all of those enemies over again, and gain XP. If you want to do that, you can do that. But there is fast travel. And I can't tell you how nice it was to finish, I don't know if it was the first real dungeon or whatever in Jedi Survivor, but one of the first, to finish that and then be like, you know what, I just want to finish this quest and move on with the story. I don't want to have to go back all the way through. I feel like I'm leveling up enough. I don't need to go farm XP. And I could just hit fast travel and go back outside. Like that was like, oh my God, this is fantastic. I feel like, it's been a few years. Like I said, I played Fallen Order at the end of 2020, so a little bit over 2 years now. I feel like meditation points in Jedi Survivor are more plentiful. I feel like I have run into more of them, like surprisingly so. Like I was playing this morning and I found one, saved my game, went maybe 10 minutes forward into the game and found another one. I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So they seem more plentiful. It could just be maybe the particular layout of that planet or maybe the route I went, all that stuff. But when the game opens up and it thrusts you out into the world, you really start to understand how well crafted it is from a design perspective in terms of forcing you to explore. Because you could critical path this game if you wanted to, but you don't have to. And there are two big gameplay design things that I think force you to explore. One is when you look at the map, it will highlight undiscovered areas. So that kind of puts that hit in your brain of, oh, I wonder what's over there. And then when you get there or you're on your way there, it almost always leads to a branching path. Well, now I can go to the right and look at that undiscovered area that I was initially on my way to, or I can go to my left and see what's over here. And that kind of just, it's that nudge from a design perspective. You don't even realize it's happening to you until you really kind of take a step back, break it down, think about it from a mechanic standpoint. And it's forcing you to explore. So I have spent a lot of time so far just dicking around in the world, just seeing what I can find. And of course, I've run into some dead ends. I've run into some areas that maybe I just don't have the ability that I need to progress, like stuff like that. Which is fine because it doesn't take you ultimately that long to backtrack. The game does feel very big, open, and it is. The maps are very, very large, but they're not so large that you can't easily backtrack to where you were to progress farther within 30, 45 seconds. There's also shortcuts you can unlock, zip lines to get you across the map faster, ropes you can climb up and down, get you down faster. There's always a way. It's very nicely laid out. It's very smart. It's a very smart game. And that's what I really appreciate because, no one likes to backtrack. No one likes to feel like they're lost. No one likes to feel like, I feel like I'm going in circles. There are a couple times where I have felt like that, where I felt like I was kind of going in circles because I couldn't visually see on the screen where I was supposed to go. And almost always it's like, oh, there's a crack in the wall that you need to shimmy through, like that kind of thing. But I also don't think I want them to necessarily fix that. I don't really necessarily want them to put like a big glowing thing on the screen, like, oh, here's where you're supposed to go. Like, I don't know if I really want that, I've run into a couple of the puzzle rooms so far. They haven't been too difficult. I am notoriously bad at puzzles in video games. I almost always need help. So I have referenced a walkthrough a couple of times just because I want to get through the game. I want to experience a game. I don't want to get bogged down trying to figure out a puzzle. That's not what's fun for me. Some people really like that, and I totally get that. There are definitely puzzles in games that I have really appreciated, through the Uncharted series and stuff like that. But it's not my favorite thing. Everybody's got mechanics of games that they like and dislike. I'm not super big into crafting, and I'm not super big into open world third person puzzle games. If I want a puzzle or a challenge in a video game, I will play a puzzle video game, something like that. So let me see. I'm trying to think if there's any other positives before I get into negatives. I mean, the gameplay is great. They start you off with pretty much all the abilities you had from the first game. Very quickly after the opening segment, you have 3 different stances. You can equip 2 at a time. You start off with a single lightsaber, a double lightsaber, a single lightsaber, a lightsaber in both hands, and then a double lightsaber, double-ended like Darth Maul. And you can equip 2 of those at a time. You can switch back and forth at will. I really enjoyed the double lightsaber, the 2-handed one. That one I've liked quite a bit. Much more customization in the game this time around. You can customize facial hair, as well as hairstyles. You can customize BD1 like you could in the first game. That's the droid that kind of sits on your shoulder and helps you out along the way. You can customize your jackets, your pants, your shirt, all that stuff. You can unlock them through a store in one of the towns you encounter, or just in the chests, treasure chests you find along the game. Let's see. I'm trying to think what else. I didn't take any notes for this game because I was too focused on actually playing the game to really take a lot of notes. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I didn't even talk about visuals and sound and all that stuff. It is an incredibly impressive looking game, especially the opening segment in Coruscant. Very, very nice. So on Friday night when I played the game, it was nighttime, so it was dark out at that point. So I actually turned all the lights off and I turned my reactive lighting on. So I have, on the back of my TV, I have a Govee kit that has a camera that overhangs my television, and it watches the screen, and then it lights the wall reactive to what's on the screen. So if there's a laser blast that's red that goes from left to right across the screen on my wall, the wall will follow it and light red across the wall. Look them up; they're pretty cool. Philips Hue does one, but it's like ungodly expensive, and it has DRM in it, which is super weird. Get the Govee one. Yes, having a camera on top of your television is weird. I thought I was going to notice it. After a night of using it, I don't notice it. And it adds to the experience. It really does. It is pretty cool. I don't use it for everything. If I'm just watching TV, I don't have it on. Obviously it doesn't work during the day. It's got to be dark in there. But if you're watching something like a Marvel movie, something with a lot of color, lights, like if I'm watching like The Mandalorian or something like that, or playing a video game, having it on does add to the experience. It is pretty cool. And then another thing that helped out quite a bit is I finally finished off my television upgrade. I recently got a new TV and soundbar. I got the subwoofer. It came in the mail this weekend, and that has added quite a bit. There's a lot of low end to this game. So it's really nice. It's overall audio and visual is a great package. I mean, they put a lot of effort into it. All right, let's get into the negatives, because unfortunately there are negatives. Basically, if you have the PC version right now, it is totally destroyed. Everybody is tearing it apart. A million negative reviews on Steam. EA's handling, of course, with their PR is not great. They're saying it's only affecting people with certain PC setups, and that does not seem to be the case at all. People with super high-end machines, low-end machines, mid-range machines, all over the place. It's not good. Really, really not good. Digital Foundry has a really good breakdown. If you're curious about it, if maybe you don't have a console and you want to check out the PC version, I would say wait. I know that there were patches. I don't know if there was a PC patch yet. It seemed like it was still kind of on the way. So I would wait, unfortunately. It also is like loaded with DRM. I think it's got de novo in it. So I ended up picking it up on PS5. And it's funny, on Friday night, I really didn't experience anything weird. Maybe I just didn't notice it. I'm tired, whatever, late at night. Maybe that section of the game is really well optimized. I'm not sure. I didn't really notice it. And then where I saved my game and picked it back up on Saturday, where I was kind of out in the open world, that's when I really started to notice it. There's quite a bit of screen tearing, and the frame rate is super, super inconsistent. I'm playing in the performance mode, which according to them, it runs the game at 1440p and 60 frames a second. There are certainly times where I've gotten what feels to be 60 frames a second, but it's not a lot. And it's very hitchy. Like, it's very noticeable. It's not a subtle thing at all. It's not like a nice wavelength where maybe you don't notice it as much. It is incredibly noticeable. And there are times where it's just like, I think they need to leave this one in the oven for a little while longer. I'm not sure what's going on with this. It hasn't stopped me from enjoying the game. I mean, it sucks. You know, I'm sure it'll get patched out. I'm sure it'll get fixed. I feel really bad for the people on PC, especially people that have a super high-end machine that they've dumped a ton of money into, that theoretically they should be able to play this perfectly fine, but because their optimization from EA is so poor, that it's just not working right. And it's really been a rough year on PC for a lot of these big AAA PC ports. Last of Us came out of the gate with issues. Forspoken had issues. Returnal had issues. Now Star Wars has issues, and there's been others along the way. And it's really strange, and it's funny because last week's big release, which we'll talk a little bit more about after this, Dead Island 2, which is a game that was stuck in like development hell, started over development like 3 times with 3 different developers, optimized for last-gen systems, comes out the gate totally fine, like no issues whatsoever. And this game, which I imagine had an infinitely higher budget, is completely screwed up. So I hope they get it together because it's a great game. You know, it's awful that there's a whole segment of people playing video games that can't experience it right now because of how poor of a job EA and Respawn did developing the PC port. And that, and like I said, also the console versions have issues as well. I don't really have any negatives so far. Granted, I've only played 3 or 4 hours of the game at this point. I don't have any gameplay issues with the game so far, outside of, I still feel a little lost here and there, but that might just be on me. Your mileage may vary on that one. Like technically it's great, but technology wise, it has problems. Technically everything else, that's great. But still, I would really recommend it. I can't say that it's my favorite thing I've played so far this year just because I haven't finished it yet. We'll see where the story goes. The story right now, there's not much of one yet. A little bit, but not a ton going on so far. I'm sure that will open up. So I was, as of right now, Hogwarts still numero uno on the list for things I have liked the most this year. And I really think that this year, if we get the games that are supposed to come out this year, I was thinking about this last night. And, I don't want to just have a bunch of hyperbole because obviously, video game releases are highly subjective, to your taste for how you think a year is going. Like last year, I thought last year was a super down year. Now, for other people, last year was great. God of War, Elden Ring, all this stuff. Those aren't games that appeal to me. So for me, last year was a down year. For me personally, with my taste, this year is on pace to be one of my favorite years ever in video games, with some of the games that are coming out. New Spider-Man, Starfield looks great. Like I said, Hogwarts has been great. I really like this. Terra Nil, Terrascape, like so far, like I'm in my wheelhouse. I'm in my groove. So, we'll see how everything shakes out, but man, this year could go down as just being one of the greats of the past 10, 15 years in video games if everything plays out right. Yeah, I think that'll probably wrap it up for Star Wars. So the only other thing I really played this week was Dead Island 2. It progressed a little bit further in the story. And it's starting to get a little hard. There is no difficulty setting in Dead Island 2. It's one size fits all. For the first few hours of the game, I wouldn't say I was breezing through it. I was dying very infrequently. I was doing okay. As I have progressed further in the game, I am dying quite a bit, and I've been getting into situations where I am dying and respawning with no health kits, no med packs, nothing, no supplies to craft more, stuck in an area where there aren't any supplies, so I'm just getting in this loop of dying over and over again, and it's getting kind of discouraging. I do really enjoy the game, but I'm wondering if maybe I'm just kind of butting up against a difficulty curve that maybe just is a bit too much for me. That's happened a lot in my life with video games. You know, I'm not great at video games, so if a game is very challenging, it's, you know, a lot of times it's just something I can't overcome. You know, I just not there anymore in my life where I'm going to sit there for hours on end and just butt my head up against the wall and try and brute force my way through something. I want to be able to just enjoy a video game. I want to feel stressed out about a video game. I want to feel discouraged about a video game. But other than that, I've really, really enjoyed Dead Island 2. Some of the places you get to go in the game are super cool. Like going through like a movie studio is really neat. And you could trigger some interesting like movie studio effects. You're fighting zombies on like, a set, like a movie set. And you could trigger like rain and like fire and like crashing scaffolding down and all this stuff. Like they do some really cool stuff. I've gotten to see a little bit more weapon variety and a few of the like tougher characters, not necessarily boss characters, but different styles of zombies and stuff. It's a really, really great game. I really can't recommend it enough. I just worry that it maybe at this point is just maybe a little bit more challenging than I initially anticipated. And obviously it's taking a backseat with Star Wars being out. It's really tough right now to sit down and be like, oh, I want to play a video game. I wonder if I should play Dead Island 2 when I've got Star Wars, right there, and I'm just super into it. Like the first thing I did when I woke up this morning was I flipped on the PlayStation and played some more Star Wars. Last night I was waiting for dinner to cook. I had a half hour, flipped on Star Wars and played for just a half hour. Like, I really want to be playing that game. I'm sure I'll be playing more of it, later today. So it's a tough sell right now, but I'm not giving up on Dead Island 2 yet. It is a very, very worthy game. So that pretty much wraps up what I've been playing. Those are the only two things outside of my sports games that I'm not going to get into, all that stuff. But before we get in, I was trying to figure out like where to segment this into the show. I guess now would be a good time. Oh, I guess for a change, recently no movie review this week. I did not go to the movies this week, though. I will be back at it next week. I'm going to the movies next week. It's the first time. Next week will be the first time since Iron Man 3 that I go see a Marvel movie at the theaters. I bought my ticket already. I'm going to see Guardians of the Galaxy 3. I recently got caught up on most of the Marvel movies. There are still some Marvel movies I have not seen. I haven't seen like Shang-Chi or Eternals or anything like that. I think the most recent thing I saw was the Black Widow movie, and then I watched WandaVision. I still need to watch Multiverse of Madness. I keep rewinding and fast-forwarding Multiverse of Madness because that has been the movie that I've been using to like calibrate my TV and calibrate my sound system. So at some point I need to actually like finish the movie instead of just rewinding back and forth constantly. I will say, when I got that subwoofer hooked up, I described it to a friend of mine as when they shipped the subwoofer, I did not realize that when I plugged it in, it would default to max level on it. So I rewound in Multiverse of Madness to like a combat scene and just let it play. It felt like I was getting a fucking prostate exam. Like the house was shaking. My dog was like, what the hell is going on? I had to crank the volume down. So yeah, very effective subwoofer. So yeah, no movie review this week, but we'll be back at it. So maybe I'll have some thoughts on Guardians next week. But the other thing that's going on is there are going to be some changes coming soon. Not necessarily from visual aspect for you guys, but for me. So I have taken it upon myself to kind of redo my house. I've been talking about it for a year now that I want to move my home office out of where I am at currently. Like, yes, of course, we are on the moon, but let's pretend that we're not on the moon and we're in a room that has no heat and no air conditioning. And so I want to move the office to the main part of the house that has heat and air conditioning, and it's nice. And, I can't see my breath during the day while I'm, working and wearing 3 hoodies and 4 pairs of pants, and my hands are ice cubes. So I'm getting closer to having that done. That should be happening within the next month or so. I have to schedule some people to come do some work on the house, waiting for that to play out. So there shouldn't be any interruptions to the show or anything like that. But that is a big thing that will be happening. And then the other thing is doing a little bit of an equipment upgrade to try and make things look a little bit nicer. And I have some other projects that I want to work on that will benefit it. So a couple years ago, when I decided to start doing this YouTube thing, I invested in a nice little microphone that's in front of me and all that, and built a new computer in 2021, I believe it was. And so I've decided to do a little bit of an upgrade. So I'm upgrading the computer. So this week I have a new processor coming in, and I'm installing new fans, and I'm putting it all into a new case. Keeping the motherboard, keeping the graphics card, keeping the RAM, all that stuff. So just CPU, fans and case, but it will help this show in the fact that the last 3 weeks in a row when I have filmed this show, it has crashed Premiere when trying to export. So I'm hoping that maybe having a little bit more processing power will help out with some of those, multi-threaded task load type things. And then it's coming in the mail, new camera. So I use a webcam for this. It is granted a nice webcam. I try to make this look a little decent with the lighting and stuff like that. But switching to actually using a mirrorless camera, so that will be on the way. And that'll be good. I used to do photography back in the day, still photography. That camera does not do, you can't use it as a webcam. So I picked up a different cam. So, I've already got lenses and stuff like that. So visually you should look a little bit nice. And also kind of the green screen effect. You can see it around my head. Not great. I am not using an actual green screen. I'm using the NVIDIA broadcast background removal, and that will be switched out for an actual legitimate green screen. So that is also coming. So the setup should start looking a little bit nicer visually. But yeah, it's, kind of larger tech upgrades. The other thing that's going to be a benefit for this is this may ultimately lead me to start streaming a little bit again. The reason being is the main reason why I don't want to stream is because I sit at this desk all day long, every day, either doing this or work, because I work from home. And I don't want to then sit at night, for hours streaming. So the setup I will have once I move the office is the computer will still be there, everything will be there, but I will actually have like a comfortable chair off to the side and a television, and I would be able to stream, instead of sitting here at my desk on the computer monitor, I'd actually be able to sit in a chair at the television and stream. And I'd be just, even though I'm in the same room with all the stuff that I do, it's mentally, it's different, right? And I think anybody that works from home can kind of understand that. So maybe we'll do some streaming in the future, but that's going to wrap up the first half, and we'll be back in just a moment with some news. All right, we are back with the news. Now, last week I wasn't feeling so great, so I did not do the news last week. So this week we have a combination of news stories that would have happened in last week's episode, plus stuff that happened this week. Kind of, some interesting stories over the past couple of weeks, but a little light still. I was kind of surprised, but we're going to start off with kind of the big news of the week, which was that UK regulators have blocked the Microsoft Activision deal. So this is coming from Video Games Chronicle. Microsoft's proposed acquisition of Activision Blizzard has been blocked by the UK's Competition and Markets Authority, called the CMA. This is a quote from their article. After months of investigation, the regulator published its final report on the $69 billion deal on Wednesday and said it had prevented over concerns it would, quote, alter the future of the fast-growing cloud gaming market, leading to reduced innovation and less choice for UK gamers over the years to come, end quote. So it's interesting that that's where it lands. It lands on cloud gaming, not necessarily the monopoly stuff that Sony has been complaining about. With Sony saying that it would be super detrimental to their business and super detrimental to PlayStation users if Call of Duty specifically, they've honed in specifically on Call of Duty, if Call of Duty were to become exclusive to Microsoft. Now, Microsoft has combated this by saying that they would happily continue to put out Call of Duty on PlayStation. They've signed this agreement in name only, really, because the deal's not done. They don't own Blizzard yet, but they have signed this agreement with Nintendo that they would put Call of Duty out with console parity. It still boggles my mind how they're going to accomplish that on the Switch. Maybe whatever Nintendo puts out next would be fine. Who knows? But that's been like the real sticking point with Sony because, people that represent Sony, higher ups in Sony have come out and said like, oh, well, what if Microsoft, says that they're going to put Call of Duty on the PlayStation, but then they purposely release a buggy version of the game? Like, a lot of this is nonsense. Call of Duty, while a massive, massive game, and certainly they've redeemed themselves in years. This year's game, a little rocky and, we're losing it a little bit. But, they've really picked up steam again after Modern Warfare, which was, 2019? Yes, it would be a hit, I guess, in a way, for Sony to lose Call of Duty. Sure, that would suck, but it's only one game, and it's not even the most played game in the world. I would understand if it was like Fortnite or something like that. Minecraft, I don't know, something like that. And Minecraft, by the way, owned by Microsoft, continues to be on Sony platforms, doesn't seem to be injecting Sony PlayStations with viruses and deleting files and deliberately buggy and all this stuff. So it's a little nonsensical. So it was interesting to see that they were really honing in on that cloud gaming because Microsoft has gone all in on cloud gaming. That's something they're really trying to push, and it is kind of a smart thing for them to do because nobody else is doing it. Sony's not really pushing it, at least not yet. I believe they acquired a company a few years ago that specializes in cloud gaming. Nintendo's not doing it really at all. But Microsoft's big thing is I still truly believe that Microsoft does not give a shit if you buy an Xbox, if you own a physical Xbox. They care if you subscribe to Xbox Live and subscribe to Game Pass. That's what they care about. They want to get Game Pass onto your mobile phone because then they can go into countries like China where console gaming is not huge, but mobile gaming is massive. And Japan, where Xbox sales have traditionally been horrible, but mobile gaming is huge. If they can get Game Pass on those phones, get Game Pass in the hands of those consumers, it's huge markets, huge opportunities. So I understand where the UK regulator is coming from. So, one of the points that got brought up this week, I believe on the Nextlander podcast was, well, what if they just don't have Game Pass in the UK, or they just don't have cloud gaming in the UK, and that's what gets this deal through? Who knows? I am not knowledgeable enough on cloud gaming. I am not knowledgeable enough on how the regulatory bodies of the United Kingdom work. I don't follow business news like this. I do to an extent, but I'm not super well versed. But this does seem like, to me at least, from the outside looking in, I guess, this does seem like a pretty big hurdle to overcome. I do believe that ultimately Xbox will overcome whatever hurdles are in front of them to get this deal done. I think that the deal getting done is a foregone conclusion. I just don't think it will be as soon as they had hoped for, because I still think there were a lot of people that when this got announced, there were a lot of people that were like, ooh, Diablo 4 will be on Game Pass. The next Call of Duty will be on Game Pass, and that's not happening. So it remains to be seen, what ultimately ends up happening with this. But Microsoft is certainly not going to go down without a fight. This deal seems to be of the utmost importance to them. It is constantly in the news cycle. It is constantly getting brought up. They are not going to take this no for a definitive answer. They are going to find out a way to get this deal done, come hell or high water. And I think ultimately, obviously, you don't want to see every studio get bought up. You don't want to see everything become super consolidated. You don't, if there's 50 developers, you don't want 25 of them to be exclusive to Microsoft and 25 of them to be exclusive to Sony. Like, that's not what you want. But ultimately, getting Blizzard, getting Activision into Xbox, it makes sense for Xbox and it makes sense for video games as a whole, and I'll tell you why I think that's true. Microsoft has very much been committed over the past, I would say 10 years, of de-emphasizing Microsoft-developed first-party exclusives. Instead, they have relied upon acquiring other companies to then make what will now be first-party exclusives, acquiring Obsidian and Bethesda and that whole package of studios, all of that, trying to acquire Activision and Blizzard. If they're not going to make more than Gears of War and Halo on their own. They need other games because Sony has really stepped up, sorry for the pun, stepped up their game over the past few years with huge first-party exclusives. Ghost of Tsushima, Spider-Man, God of War, even Returnal to a degree, all The Last of Us, all Uncharted, like all of this stuff. They've really become a haven for, or not a haven, they've become a standard setter almost for what happens when you have great first-party exclusives, following the Nintendo model. Nintendo lives and dies on its first-party exclusives. Pokemon, Mario, Zelda, Metroid, all that stuff. That's their bread and butter and has been since day one. And Sony, it took Sony a while to get there, but they are there and they are leading the way. And Microsoft is really lagging behind. Now, that being said, as good as all of those first-party exclusives are, as much business as it drives to the PlayStation, as much business as it drives to Nintendo, no other video game company in the world can hold a candle to what Game Pass is for Microsoft. Game Pass has changed video games as we know it. I mean, it is the best deal we have ever had in video games. It is unbelievable. Next week, Redfall comes out. A few months ago, I could not have given less of a shit about Redfall, but they released one trailer that showed off the gameplay that got me to be like, I will at least try that. And now I have no financial punishment, really, if I don't like the game. I can download that game on Tuesday. If I don't like it after an hour, I can delete it off my Xbox, never think about it again, and I have not wasted a single penny of my money. If I bought Star Wars for $70 on Friday and it fucking sucked, I'm out that $70. The best I'm going to get back is walking into GameStop the next day and trading it in for $30. Like, you can't deny the impact and value that is Game Pass. That is their greatest strength. Microsoft's greatest strength is not the games on their system, it's the access to games on their platform. And cloud gaming, if they can really pull it off, is going to be another huge haymaker, huge blow to the industry that they can say, hey, we got there first and we're doing it better than everybody else. Because Sony, they kind of have their Game Pass equivalent. Games are slow to come out on it. It doesn't have first-party games, which I don't blame them. Sony should not put their first-party games out on PlayStation Plus. That would be a horrible idea because those games are proven to sell and sell big. Don't do that. That would be financially disastrous for Sony, so I don't blame them. But they need to pick it up a little bit with the quality of games. Every time Game Pass makes an announcement for games that are coming out, very few and far between do I look at the list and go, that's a weak one. Sure, there are some where you'll get 10 games and 9 of which are like, but you get that one that's like, ooh, I wanted to try that. Ooh, I thought about buying that one. I didn't get around to playing it. I want to play that. So that is where their strength lies. And acquiring these companies is going to increase the competition between Microsoft and Sony, which will then raise the level of games that are coming out. It will push them to be like, well, we need another heavy hitter. We got to crank these things out. We got to get games out. Now, obviously, there could be a negative repercussion to that. Games getting rushed, more issues, crunch, all that stuff. Let's take that out of the factor for the purpose of this argument and look at it from kind of a world top-down view of if Microsoft can start making solid first-party games, Sony's making their solid first-party games. Let's get that dollar. Games are $70 now, and Microsoft, and maybe those games are on Game Pass. That sways some of those people over to Microsoft. It can only benefit us. Now, that's, there's got to be a limit. Like I said, we don't want every game company out there purchasing up every developer in the world and all that stuff. You don't want that. But there's definitely a middle ground that you can hit. Beyond Activision Blizzard, I don't know who else Microsoft would go after. Capcom was rumored to be for sale for a long time, but the past few Resident Evils have turned the tide financially for them. Street Fighter is going to be huge for them this year. I don't think they're looking to sell anytime soon. Electronic Arts has always been threatening to be sold. I don't think Microsoft would pick them up. I think somebody else picks them up, like a weird company picks them up, like a company that you wouldn't really think would grab them. But even then, I don't think that happens anytime soon. So, like I said, I this deal goes through one way or another, I think. I would be very surprised if this deal doesn't ultimately go through, but another hurdle, and a big hurdle, in the way. All right, moving on. So this happened a couple weeks ago. Media Molecule, makers of Little Big Planet, and Dreams, they announced, we covered on the show a couple weeks ago, that Dreams was shutting down. Well, the co-founder and the director of Dreams, Mark Healy, is leaving Media Molecule. So Media Molecule obviously is going to change in a big way because of that. They have announced that they are working on another game. It is not Dreams, and it's not going to be like Little Big Planet. They've passed off Little Big Planet at this point. The last Little Big Planet game, that Sackboy's Big Adventure, which was a launch platforming game for the PS5, that was developed by a different studio. So we'll see what they do. I would honestly be surprised if they continue down the line of making a game that is kind of like a tool box. They've done that so much. Like pretty much every game I could think of by them had that to some degree. Yes, Little Big Planet and Tearaway were platformers, but they had that customization aspect to it. They had that sandbox, that let's stick all these things together, build our own world kind of thing. And of course, Dreams was too. Dreams was almost like a dev tool. So I would not be surprised if they move in a different direction, especially because they did come straight out and said like, yeah, our next game is not like Dreams. Maybe they just want to make a traditional game. They want to get out of their comfort zone. It's worked really well for other studios. Respawn, we talked about Star Wars earlier, known for first-person shooters. Now they're equally known for great third-person platforming action games. Studios can certainly change their direction. You don't have to be locked into one genre forever. So yeah, it's a big blow. I definitely have a soft spot for Media Molecule. I really enjoyed the Little Big Planet game, specifically Little Big Planet 2. That was a big one for me. I really liked Little Big Planet 2, and I loved Tearaway. Oh, Tearaway was so good. Excellent use of the Vita. A little frightening when they put my face in the game. I wasn't thrilled on that. So I don't have mirrors in the house. I don't need to see my name or my face in the game either. So yeah, I'm curious to see what they do next. I'm curious to see what Mark Healy does next. He's had some great ideas, and he's done some very interesting things in video games. So we'll see where he lands, and that kind of leads us into our next story, which was, we talked about this a few weeks ago, that Joseph Staten, who was leaving 343 and Halo and Microsoft and all that, he has actually landed at Netflix. So he's going to be heading up some video game development for Netflix. He says he's going to be working on an original multi-platform AAA game, and Netflix is certainly trying to dip their toes into video games.
I tried joining Netflix once. I thought I would be able to pitch them a show or a movie and be the next hot thing, but they thought I was there for an internship opening.
I'm sorry, buddy. But Netflix, I'm trying to think. So the two big things for Netflix that I can think of were, they put out Into the Breach, I believe was a Netflix game. You can play it on Steam, but I think Netflix had Into the Breach, and then Immortality last year you could play on Netflix. I don't know. They make a big move like this, getting a big name like Joseph Staten, and they say these big things, and the same thing happened with Stadia, right? Like, we're getting all these like industry veterans and all this stuff. And didn't like Stadia have like Jade Raymond for a little bit, supposedly working on something, and that didn't work out. Who knows if this actually comes to fruition? I don't know. Joseph Staten's the kind of guy that can make a game. You can lead a studio, figure something out, and but these always seem like this is a bad example because this is a studio that actually did ship games and shipped great games. But every time I see something like this, like a Netflix saying that they're going to do a big AAA game, or Amazon saying they're going to do a big AAA game, it always reminds me of Peter Molyneux. Like, Peter Molyneux always had these like big grand ideas, and he would be like the type of guy, like if Netflix came out tomorrow and said, "Oh, we've hired Peter Molyneux," like, that would not surprise me. He always had these big grandiose ideas, like the whole, like the stuff he was trying to do with Kinect, which all ended up being like a big sham anyways. but I mean, he did release great games like Fable. The Fable games are fantastic. Fable 3, but Fable 2 is amazing. Like, he did have a proven track record of good games. He also had a proven track record of messes as well. Nobody bats 1,000 in video games. It's pretty rare. So I don't know. Is Netflix committed to this? Seemingly so. They're spending money on it. The game releases on Netflix seemingly are few and far between. I don't have Netflix currently. Netflix is a streaming service I don't keep year round simply because of the cost. It's very expensive. I don't like the fact that they charge for 4K, and I certainly don't like the fact that HBO is about to start charging more for 4K. I think that's ridiculous. So I have not actually played a game through Netflix. I have many other better ways to play video games. I mean, I guess if Netflix came out with some exclusive that I, really struck my fancy, I guess, I grab a subscription and play, but that hasn't happened. But I don't know, if you have played a game on Netflix, leave a comment, tell me what the experience is. Is it something you can play on your TV? Does it have to be mobile? I know with Immortality last year, like, they were really emphasizing, like, this is only on Netflix mobile. Like, you cannot do this on your television. And I think that was the way with Into the Breach. I remember people saying, like, oh yeah, I had to play it on my iPad or something like that. So I don't know, but this does say multi-platform. So is it just Netflix published and this game comes out on PS5, Xbox, Switch, PC, whatever? Or is it going to be something that's, it's on Netflix, but also on PS5, Xbox, whatever. So that remains to be seen, but cool that he's, onto something else already. Certainly did not take long for him to make that announcement. I'm sure that was well in the works, leading up to him announcing that he was leaving and, all that. So, yeah, good for him. All right. Next up, this was kind of the big story of the previous week, was that Sega has decided to spend some money, and they have spent $775 million. $776 million. Extra million in there. Those Sonic bucks. And they have bought Rovio, the makers of Angry Birds. And a lot of people have been really interested in this one. Financially, it seems like a pretty decent deal because I believe this is probably less than what Rovio would have been worth at the height of the Angry Birds craze. It also seems to not be that much over what their market cap, I believe, was. Usually when you acquire a company, you are not paying what that company is worth. You are paying over what the company is worth. And this is much closer. There were rumors that this was going to be more than $776 million, but it's not. The article on CNBC says it was a 19% premium to their closing price. So essentially they paid 19% over the closing price to get Rovio. Sega really wants to do stuff with mobile. It makes sense. Everybody's trying to acquire a big mobile developer. It's part of the Activision deal with Microsoft. They would get King, which is the Candy Crush people. Candy Crush obviously was a hot mobile game years back, but still makes a boatload of money. I don't know how well the modern Angry Birds do. I know that they had that issue where people were still playing the original Angry Birds because it did not have all the microtransactions and ads and all that stuff. You could just download a regular version on your mobile device, which is what I had on my phone. I've played very little cell phone mobile games in my lifetime. Angry Birds is probably my favorite. I really like Angry Birds. I've played that game quite a bit in my lifetime. It's just a really well-designed, simple game. Always enjoyed it. I couldn't get into the other one simply because I didn't want to pump real money into it. I didn't want to watch a million ads and all that stuff. I just wanted to play the core game. They eventually delisted it so that you would essentially be forced to get the newer versions with the ads and the DLC and all that, or microtransactions and all that stuff. But if they are spending that much money, then obviously Angry Birds is still pumping out some cash. They've had the Angry Birds movies, tons of merchandise, all that stuff. I would assume that at some point in this deal, Sega is going to tell them, all right, let's work on something besides Angry Birds. Let's see if we can strike lightning twice, and get another big hit going. And I'm sure along the way, you're going to see Sonic Angry Birds and, I don't know, I'd like to see Yakuza Angry Birds or something. I don't know, start flinging stuff into Kamurocho. That's what I would like to see. But I mean, for the traditional video game player, they seem to always devalue, and I wouldn't say look down on, but definitely devalue and underestimate the impact and revenue stream of mobile games. There are mobile games you have probably never heard of that are making bank. One of the biggest stories, and I didn't cover it simply because I just did not have the time to play the game. It's on my list, but one of the biggest dominating stories of the past week was the launch of, oh God, what's the name of the game? Honkai Star Rail, the new Hoyoverse game. They made Genshin Impact, and Genshin Impact was huge. And a lot of people don't look at that as a mobile game because you could play it on consoles. Same with Honkai Star Rail. You will eventually be able to play it on consoles. It's on PC and mobile right now. I just haven't got a chance to play it, but I do want to check it out. It looks interesting to me. Those games are massive, but people just kind of discount them. They don't really think about that, and they don't realize like how much money is being put into this stuff. There was a video I watched on YouTube a couple months ago where this guy did like a look at mobile developers in Japan, and they were making a like golf game. And you look at like the size of the development team and like look at the offices, and I did some Googling to like look it up because these are games that they don't get localized. They don't come out in America or in the English language countries. They seem to be exclusive to Japan. And I did some research, and these things are like downloaded by millions and millions of people. They're all pumping money into these things. Mobile games are huge. Just because there isn't that like one really big one right now, like Farmville or Candy Crush or Angry Birds or whatever it is, doesn't mean that they're not still out there doing really well financially. So I am not surprised that they make a move like this. I am a little surprised that Sega is willing to spend that much money. Certainly. Because to me, I feel like, if you're willing to spend that much money, why don't you spend some of that money and maybe get a couple other devs in the Sega family and kind of pump up your publishing, deals. But hey, maybe they were saving up to do something like this because financially long-term, it's a way better deal for them. All right, next up is some Atari news. Atari out there making deals. They have purchased the rights to 150 games. The biggest of which, probably the most well-known of which, is Bubsy. They also got Demolition Racer and Hardball, but they have picked up a bunch, including like 1942, F-14, F-117A, like a ton of stuff. I actually couldn't find a list of all 150 of them. Everybody's mostly been talking about Bubsy. Now, what are they actually going to do with all these games? One of the big things that happened, or big things that was touched upon in the story by multiple news outlets that covered it, was it's not necessarily about producing new games or new entries in these franchises or sequels to games that people have forgotten about from 30 years ago. A lot of it seems to do with like merchandising, stuff like that. So, Bubsy's kind of become like a meme at this point, but now they could sell Bubsy coffee mugs, Bubsy t-shirts, Bubsy plush toys, like all this stuff. They don't necessarily need to be making new games in the Bubsy franchise. They just kind of wanted the rights to the character and stuff like that. Now it does seem like they are going to make some newer games. Atari has been putting out some interesting stuff lately. They just did the Aka R game from Jeff Minter, the guy who made Tempest, which seemingly did well. Atari last year really kind of garnered some warm nostalgic thoughts and kind of goodwill when they did the Atari 50 deal, which was like that hybrid documentary game. Atari's been weird. They just a few years ago, they were talking about making their own cryptocurrency and building hotels and all of this stuff. And now they seemingly are back to like, let's do some cool video game stuff. And one of the really interesting things is that one of the things that happened with this deal is it wasn't just like random 150 games. They actually acquired the catalog for certain publishers. They grabbed Microprose, Infogrames, Accolade, and Infogrames is interesting because at one point Infogrames owned Atari. So kind of like how the tables have turned. But I've always really liked Atari. My first video game system I ever played in my life was an Atari 2600. I really, really enjoy the Atari 2600. If given the option, somebody put a Super Nintendo, a Nintendo, and an Atari 2600 in front of me, honestly, I'd probably go towards the 2600. There are some amazing games on that system. A lot of games that most people have never heard of are absolutely fantastic on that game. They just weren't the big mainstream hits. If you're ever out looking for Atari games, if you find a 20th Century Fox published game, the large majority of those games are really good games, but just a lot of them didn't get, they weren't breaking sales records or, knocking people's doors down or anything like that. So Atari's always had a big soft spot for me. I actually really liked a lot of the, back in the Dreamcast day, which was the Infogrames days, they were making like these modern version of classic Atari games. Probably a lot of the ones that people remember, they did like the Frogger game, which I wasn't thrilled about. But they did a newer version of Warlords. And Warlords is always a game that I really enjoy. It's a classic arcade game. You can play it on the Atari consoles as well. The arcade game is great. The console version's obviously, an Atari console or an Atari arcade port was pretty rough. If you look at like the Atari ports of like Pac-Man and stuff like that, not great. But the Warlords version that was on the Dreamcast was amazing. It was super, super good. I loved playing that. So I certainly would not mind seeing them maybe taking another crack at that kind of thing, taking some of these games. I don't think they would survive as single retail releases like they were on the Dreamcast. Those were like full price Dreamcast games. But if you can do, hey, we're going to make a modern version of Hardball, I don't know, for lack of a better example. And it's $10-15, or they do like a $60 compilation of like 30 games and they're all like modern versions. And maybe they toss the originals on there as well, kind of mixing that archiving thing, maybe get Digital Eclipse involved because they did a really good job with a lot of that stuff over the past few years. So it's cool. It's cool seeing more positive Atari news in the, out there than some of the negative stuff for the past few years. All right, moving on is a game that actually got announced, I feel like a year or so ago. And at the time, I remember seeing it covered a little bit. And I thought it looked really interesting. It looked really neat, but it kind of just came and went, is all of a sudden blowing up again because new footage has come out. It is a game called Unrecord. It is a photorealistic first-person shooter played from the viewpoint of a police body cam. It has been all over Twitter over the past week and a half or so. And I mean, it is shockingly realistic looking. I mean, it really is. And a lot of people are obviously really not thrilled about this. They're, a lot of anti-police sentiment, and I'm not going to get into that. I certainly understand where they're coming from. But I want to focus more on like the technical aspect of this, and you really should watch this footage. Try and separate out your beliefs towards police brutality and all that stuff. It's very hard to do because police brutality is a horribly invasive thing that has weaseled its way into all aspects of our culture at this point because they are finally a lot of it's going unchecked, but we have seen some strides taken towards trying to crack down on it. But we still have a very long way to go because there are people out there with, I didn't want to get political, but there are people out there with a badge that think that gives them a license to kill. But take a look at this from a technical perspective and see, like, it is really, truly something to behold. It is very, very lifelike looking. It's something that I think, this game is going to come out. It's going to garner a lot of controversy. It'll probably sell fairly well. But I think that there are going to be other people that take this and run with it. And do other styles of games, not necessarily a first-person shooter, although this certainly lends itself best to a first-person shooter coming from that body cam perspective. But I could certainly see somebody doing like an endless runner like this, like a Mirror's Edge type thing. It really is showing off what the Unreal 5 engine can do. I can only talk so much about this because it is something you need to watch. So I do suggest you go and look up the trailer. You can find it. It's on YouTube. It's all over the place if you haven't seen it. It is like, it knocks you back for a second because you're like, oh, this is a game. Like, obviously, once you get into it and you pay attention to the details, you can very much tell it is a video game. It's realistic and lifelike to an extent, But I mean, it looks like an FMV game. I mean, that's really what it does. I mean, it looks like an FMV game. And I could see somebody making a modern FMV game using this style, and that would be pretty cool. I'd be okay with that. Let's see, what is next up? Oh yeah, Guerrilla Games, we know them. Guerrilla Games makes the Horizon games. They used to make the Killzone games. Well, their Angie Smets is now leaving Guerrilla and being promoted to development strategy, or head of development strategy at PlayStation Studios. So it's leading to another shakeup at Guerrilla. Smets has been there for 20 years at Guerrilla. She was the studio head along Jan Bart van Beek and Michael van der Leeuw. I apologize, I'm terrible with names from Scandinavian countries. So they are adding more studio heads, studio directors to Guerrilla. And van der Leeuw is leaving the studio leadership role. He is going to be working on their engine. So he's going to be leading the technology and strategy for their engine. But yeah, Smets, she's had a really good track record along the way at Guerrilla, and seems like a pretty good choice to move into this role at PlayStation. We've touched upon it a lot, in this episode and previous episodes, that PlayStation has really had a strong streak of great first party games at their studios, and these console exclusives that are driving sales. I mean, they really are. There are people out there that are buying PS5s just because they want to play some of these exclusives. And they're not always just the exclusives that you think of. I've talked about this previously, and obviously now the baseball game is multi-platform. But there are years past where I was working at a video game store, and we had people that would buy a PS4 just to play the show every year. That was their thing. Just like, you always hear the kind of the internet joke of like, oh, there's the, Joe average gamer that only plays Madden and Call of Duty. Those people do exist. There are people I knew that did not play video games except for their baseball game every year and would buy a PlayStation system to have it. So yeah, I mean, hopefully this doesn't screw up stuff at Guerrilla. They've been through some shakeups previously. They did announce, because the DLC for the last Horizon game came out recently, they did announce that they are working on another Horizon game. I don't know if this is going to complete a trilogy, or they're not really thinking it in terms of a trilogy, and it's just, here's the next Horizon game with Alloy, that kind of things. They also did the VR game earlier this year. So they're hard at work, doing stuff. Hopefully this doesn't, throw a wrench in the works for what they're trying to do, but it seems like I am sure they will, adapt and strive, and hopefully Angie Smets does really well over at PlayStation. All right. Kind of a big one was coming hot off the heels of Elden Ring. From Software has started to talk about the next Armored Core game, Armored Core 6, which is called Fires of Rubicon. They announced it. I can't remember if they announced it earlier this year or the end of last year. I want to say it was earlier this year. And it seemed like it was probably going to be a 2024 game, something like that. But no, it is coming out August of this year. So we are starting to get really stacked at the end of August and beginning in middle of September. So they had some gameplay come out, and it looks really nice. It looks really good. I think they've done a really good job, and the media and the press have really helped with this, of there are so many people that only know From Software for those Souls games. They just are not familiar with them from the perspective of anything else they've ever made. And it's very much like, this is not a Dark Souls game with mechs. This is its own thing. It is not, it is not that style of thing. They can make other games. But I thought it looked really good. I'm really curious what they do with the formula, because Armored Core was always a very grindy game. At times very, banging your head against the wall kind of thing. So, I hope this isn't that, because it looks really smooth. It looks really polished. I was surprised it's coming out so soon. We haven't had a big mech game in a while, I feel. I think it's been a little bit. I mean, the first one in my head always goes back to, oh God, what was the one that had its own controller? That was the cockpit thing on the Xbox. Steel Battalion. I always go back to Steel Battalion. That's like my default mech game. If you've ever played Steel Battalion, it is wild. The controller is insane. If you have, for whatever reason, never seen the Steel Battalion controller, you should. I believe it is the only video game controller that has a dedicated windshield wiper button on it. But Christian, as a you're sort of mech-ish. You have your robot body. What are you thinking about this?
Can you get a mech body for me? I'm tired of floating around in a television. I need limbs, baby. I want to grip things.
You do not need to grip things. You have arms. You have arms. They're right there. They're blue. You got blue arms, bud. I don't know what you're talking about. You don't need any more. You don't need legs. You can fly. Look, you got jetpacks. You got a jet crotch. That's all you need. I wish I had a jet crotch. So yeah, if you get a chance, check out the trailer. If this isn't your thing, you've never played an Armored Core game, but you want to play something a little bit different and from a studio that has a track record of making very good different styles of games, maybe this is up your alley. All right, our last story of the week is an interesting one. So it's been known for a little while now that they are adapting the Twisted Metal games into a television show coming to Peacock. Peacock original Twisted Metal starring Anthony Mackie, Neve Campbell, and Samoa Joe, the professional wrestler. So Samoa Joe plays Sweet Tooth, the evil clown of the Twisted Metal franchise, although he is body only. That character is being voiced separately, and Will Arnett is doing the voice. So the teaser trailer came out. We saw a little bit of Anthony Mackie in it, driving a car down a road with some machine guns, and he put a music CD into his CD player. And then at the very end, we saw a brief look at Samoa Joe, Sweet Tooth. The show looks really generic and kind of low budget. Like, I'm really curious what the special effects are going to look like, because it just looks very like we had some college kids learn Blender and now we've made this. And I just I like Anthony Mackie. I was going through his filmography the other day, thinking about like what he's done. And I really do like him as an actor, but I've just never bought him. And I know he's going to be the new Captain America, and he was, the Falcon and all the Marvel stuff. I just don't ever really buy him as this like tough guy action guy. Like, it just doesn't come off natural. Like, it feels like he's playing pretend. Like, I get, obviously they're actors, they're all playing pretend, but he just doesn't have that aura of like a badass action star. It's just kind of like what he has been lumped into due to the success of the Marvel movies. I hope I'm wrong. I hope the show is neat. It comes out in a few months. It's coming out in July. So, we have some time to go before it actually comes out. At the very least, since it is video game related, I will do this for you. I will take the bullet for you, dear viewers, and I will watch at least the first episode and talk about it. But, I'm such a degenerate that I'll probably watch the whole thing. But yeah, that's going to wrap up the show for this week. Next week to look forward to, Redfall comes out next week, so we'll talk a little bit about Redfall next weekend. I'm sure I'll be playing more Star Wars, so we'll have more Star Wars talk to go along. Obviously, we'll cover all the fun news. Next Saturday, when I start switching this computer out of its case and putting in a new processor, if I screw it up, then we won't have a show at all. But hopefully that doesn't happen. But yeah, thanks for hanging out as always. And Christian, any last words before we go for this week?
Come on, we gotta get out of here. That lightsaber isn't gonna build itself. I need you to drive me to whatever store sells kyber crystals and plutonium.
Wonderful. See you next week, everybody. Take it easy.